Good afternoon, everybody. We're getting ready to get started here, so consider this a 2-minute warning. If our colleagues from both sides of the aisle in both houses that serve on the Senate Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee and the Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee will make their way to room 4202, we'd certainly appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a joint meeting of the Senate Energy, Utilities, and Commerce Committee, and Communications Committee, and the Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee. My name is Alex Padilla, Chair of the Senate Committee, joined by Assemblymember Fuentes, Chair of the Assembly Committee. And the purpose of today's hearing is to fulfill our mandate in the Elections Code to hold a public hearing on any measure that has qualified for the state ballot at least 30 days before the election. Today we have on the agenda consideration of Proposition 16, the new 2/3 vote requirement for local public electricity providers. We'll start the hearing with a presentation on the measure by the Office of the Legislative Analyst. And to ensure balance, each side of the debate will be given 20 minutes to present their arguments. The witnesses for each panel were selected by the lead groups for the measure's proponents and opponents. We try to be fair and balanced around here. We'll provide equal time and try to keep everybody on track. And we'll conclude the hearing today with the opportunity for public testimony. We will attempt to provide those wishing to testify under public comment about 2 minutes to present their views, as long as the line doesn't reach San Francisco from here. With that, Chairman Fuentes, would you like to make any opening statement? And we'd certainly invite our Republican colleagues to do the same when they arrive.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. These statutorily required informational hearings on the propositions are a good forum to discuss the merits of initiatives before they go to the voters. However, the power of the legislature to respond to information from the hearing is limited. When we identify technical flaws in ballot language or problems with overall language, the legislature has no ability to amend the language prior to election. So if problems are identified, it's up to the voters to reject the ballot initiative and for the proponents to start again. Even with this limitation on the legislature's ability to respond to the hearing today, the hearing should not be a waste of time. This may be the only time before the election where there is a multiple-party public discussion on the proposal with opportunity for vigorous questions of and from both supporters and opponents. While I know there will be other debates on Proposition 16, this forum is the only time where there will be this level of scrutiny of the language. So I would like to start the hearing by thanking all the witnesses and the participants for being here today for this very important forum. Senator.
Okay. Thank you very much, members of both committees. Let's start by inviting forward Tiffany Roberts from the Legislative Analyst Office to present the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Tiffany Roberts, Legislative Analyst Office. In my comments today on Prop 16, I'll provide you with the current lay of the land, so to speak, how Prop 16 would change that, and what the fiscal impact may be to state and local government revenues. On the first page of your handout, you see a quick summary. Prop 16 would place a new voter approval requirement on local governments before they can use public funds to start up or expand electricity service into a new territory or implement community choice aggregation. As you all know, Californians generally receive their electricity service from one of three types of providers, either an IOU, POU, or ESP. Next page of your handout. State law allows currently for a fourth option referred to as community choice aggregation, which I'll refer to in the rest of my testimony as CCA. The law allows a city or county, or a combination of the two, to provide electricity within their jurisdiction through a contract with an electricity provider other than the IOU that would otherwise serve that local area. Although only one CCA currently exists, several communities are exploring this option. In recent years, a limited number of local governments in the state have explored the idea of expanding publicly owned utilities into new territory currently served by an IOU. In some cases, these proposals have been put before the voters for their approval under provisions of state law. The current voter approval requirements for publicly owned electricity providers under state law are as follows. If a local government intends to expand its electricity service into a new territory, the new area must be annexed, and in some cases, a majority of voters in the area proposed for annexation must approve the expansion. In such cases, however, no vote of the public is generally required within the existing service territory. In contrast, local agency action to create and begin implementation of a CCA may be undertaken on a vote of the local agency governing board and does not require local voter approval. Next page of your handout. Proposition 16 would place new voter approval requirements on local governments before they can use public funds to start up or expand electricity service into a new territory or implement a CCA. Specifically, first, before an authorized local government entity can start up electricity service, it would need to receive approval by 2/3 of the voters in the area proposed to be served. Second, before an existing publicly owned utility can expand its electricity delivery service into a new territory, it would need to receive approval by 2/3 of the voters in the area currently served by the utility and 2/3 of the voters in the new area proposed to be served. Third, the measure would also require 2/3 voter approval for a local government to implement a CCA. The measure provides 3 exemptions to local governments from these voter approval requirements. The first exception is if the use of public funds has been previously approved by the voters, both within the existing local jurisdiction and the territory proposed for expansion. The second exception, if the public funds would be used solely to purchase, provide, or supply electricity from renewable sources. And third, if the public funds would be used only to provide electricity for the local government's own use. Next, turn to the last page of your handout for the fiscal impact of the proposition. Because this measure requires voter approval for specified local government actions that can currently be accomplished without a vote, it would result in additional election costs. In most cases, the balloting could be consolidated with already scheduled elections, and therefore the increased cost would probably be minor. This measure could affect local government costs and revenues due to its potential effects on the operation of publicly owned utilities and CCAs. It could also affect the finances of state and local government agencies in California because of its potential impact on electricity rates. These effects would largely depend on future actions of voters and local governments. First, the new requirements could result in public disapproval of such changes. Also, the existence of these new voter approval requirements could deter some local government agencies from proceeding with such plans. To the extent that this occurred, these local government agencies would be somewhat smaller in size and, as a result, would have lower total revenues and costs. Second, the enactment of this measure could also affect the finances of state and local government agencies in California due to its potential impact on electricity rates. As I mentioned before, some local government agencies might not start up or expand a publicly owned utility into a new territory or implement a CCA, and as a result of the measure's new requirements. In this event, the rates paid by electricity customers in that and neighboring jurisdictions could be higher or lower than would otherwise have been the case. For example, if the measure prevented the expansion of publicly provided electricity that depended on the new construction of new energy infrastructure, rates might be held lower than might otherwise be the case. On the other hand, if the measure lessened the competitive pressure on IOUs, the rates charged to electricity customers might eventually be higher than otherwise would have been the case. These impacts could affect state and local government costs, since many public agencies are themselves large consumers of electricity. Also, to the extent that changes in electricity rates affect business profits, sales, and taxable income, these factors could also affect state and local tax revenues. Our bottom line, in the short run, the net fiscal effect on all these factors on state and local government finances is unlikely to be significant on a statewide basis due to the relatively limited number of local government agencies considering the startup or expansion of electricity services into new territory at this time. In the long run, however, the net fiscal effect of the measure is unknown and would depend on future actions of local governments and voters. That completes my remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee or either committee? Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to join you here today. I think you gave a very thorough presentation. With regard to the fiscal impact, use the verb could affect. Clearly, they're unknown, so it's impossible to put any kind of price tag on it.
Morgan with the Legislative Analyst Office. In terms of the long-run effect, it is impossible to put a price on it for a couple of reasons. And one, the effect of the measure is very dependent on how local government agencies that were perhaps planning to expand their power react, as well as the impact on electricity rates. And in terms of the impact on electricity rates, that's uncertain because the effect of the measure can work in various directions, and I'll just explain. As my colleague mentioned, to the extent that it reduces competitive pressure on electricity pricing due to reducing sort of competition in the electricity market, that could be serve as a upward pressure on pricing. But with publicly provided power, while in many cases in the state that is cheaper than privately provided power, that's not necessarily the case. And often with publicly provided power, there are a number of policy goals of the public agencies. For instance, perhaps increased use of renewable power may be beyond current law requirements, may be one of the policy goals. So the direction on prices is uncertain. There are factors that could go both ways, and that's in the end why the long-term effect is uncertain. But in the short run, given the number of agencies that are sort of currently considering expansion, that which is limited, the short-run effect is unlikely to be major.
You had mentioned there's the possibility that rates could go up because this will, in fact, limit competition.
That is one possible direction,
right,
but in conjunction with other possible impacts. That's correct.
In stepping back just a few feet and looking at this from a broader perspective, what this measure is really about is limiting competition. It's not about anything else, right?
Okay. Best not for us to comment on the motives of the proponents.
And I appreciate that. I know we're a fine line here because we're not to get political or presume motivations, but in effect, this will do nothing but limit competition.
It certainly has the effect of potentially deterring public expansion of power.
Does it increase competition?
And nothing in and of itself that serves to increase competition.
So I think we all recognize that this is about limiting competition. In in your note, you say, and I'm reading from it here, it says, if an existing publicly owned utility seeks to expand its electric delivery service into a new territory, it must receive an approval by 2/3 of the voters in both the area currently served by the utility and the new area proposed to be served. An arduous task, in many cases, and a near impossible task to reach that 2/3. What does this do to new housing development? What does this do to the construction of new roads and infrastructure? What does this do to the value of existing homes in adjoining neighborhoods? Did you look at any of those aspects of this?
So the question of the increased vote requirement, how does that impact?
Well, let's say we have a neighborhood which receives its electricity from a municipal utility district, and there's to be a new development next door to this neighborhood. It will be served by the same muni. The vote will be required.
If it's within the current, so expanded development within the current service territory, the public owned
That's the situation I'm talking about.
is no requirement, no new vote requirements there. It's simply if you're expanding into a new territory that's currently served by an investor-owned utility. So it accommodates growth within a current service territory.
I want to come back. I want to just I've got a piece that was written by John Giesman. I think we're familiar with him. He served as a energy commissioner from 2002 to 2008. And I think he has a different read on that. He says, bottom line, if you're a resident of Anaheim or Burbank or Glendale or Pasadena or Riverside or any of the several dozen similarly impacted jurisdictions, your new neighbor isn't going to be getting his electricity turned on until 2/3 of the voters say so. So would you argue with that statement?
I guess one has to consider, I guess, sort of new neighbor. I guess if it's in, it depends on whether, if you're an expanding, if the geographic boundaries of the city is expanding through annexation, yes. So if that's your new neighbor, that would be subject to a vote requirement. It's just within the current geographic sort of boundaries of the public utility that would not be affected. So and there certainly are expanding cities geographically.
Pardon my interruption here. I mean, from what I'm listening, I mean, is there any area of the state of California today that does not have somebody servicing electricity? So when a new home goes up, it's in somebody's territory, right? So when somebody moves into a home, an old home or a newly constructed home, it's already in somebody's service territory. So it's not that other voters dictate whether the lights get turned on or not.
That's I mean, essentially...
Okay, I just want to make sure I heard the question and response accurately. Continue.
So in the situation where that vote requirement would be necessary, would you have any concern for property values of existing homes, the potential that development wouldn't occur because a developer wouldn't want to come in and risk any investment dollars because it's dependent upon a 2/3 vote of a local area? I'm just trying to connect some dots because this is significant legislation being proposed, and I think we need, and I appreciate the time you allow me here, that we really understand what the possibilities are. Will this deter development? Will this deter builders from investing in California if this is law? Because no lights will be turned on in certain circumstances without a 2/3 majority vote.
I think perhaps that question is best addressed by the proponents and opponents, but probably to clarify the measure, I guess in terms of my understanding, consistent with what the chair was mentioning, that the state is essentially divided up in terms of service territories. So it's not as if any new development wouldn't be served by someone. The issue that's affected by the measure is who that someone is, whether it's the current provider or perhaps someone new.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Hold on a second. We have a queue here. Assemblymember Huffman has some questions, followed by Assemblymember Swanson, And Assemblymember Amiano, you're now on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Leno has done a good job of exploring how this would affect annexation and the ability of those who are served by municipal power authorities to get the same service as their neighbors in the future, and I share his concern in that regard. I'm also concerned by the precedent that this would have on revenue bonds. My understanding is that currently there is no situation where a government entity in California would ever be required to have a two-thirds vote at any level, local or state, to issue a revenue bond. Is that correct?
Not fully familiar with that law. What's clear, though, that the measure certainly does provide a very broad definition of public funds, including ratepayer funds as well. So that is, so it does place a vote requirement on financing that typically is not required.
Right. Well, I certainly invite somebody to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is that there is no precedent at all for requiring a two-thirds vote of a revenue bond of a government agency at any level in the state of California. Now, there are exceptions, and I want to ask you about those. One of the exceptions in this initiative would be for renewables, but as I read this, unless a new power authority, CCA or a municipal power authority, was going 100% renewable right out the gates with its energy portfolio, even if it was 99% renewable, this would require a two-thirds vote for using revenue bonds to finance any part of that new authority. Is that correct?
That's our understanding, yes.
And then finally, there's another exception with respect to government agencies that are using power to offset their own use. And my concern there is, as I understand current law, in part from having worked on a bill with Assemblymember Laird a couple years ago that allowed public entities to aggregate and share power among themselves, that they can do that now. And this would appear to require, if one government agency was generating more than it needed and wanted to aggregate with a sister agency, this would appear to require a two-thirds vote in order for them to do that. Do you have any different reading?
I think specifically for the legal concept of community choice aggregation, that does require sort of the voter approval.
No, I'm talking about if a county government wants to use public funds to invest in renewables to offset its own load. This would appear to create an allowance for them to do so without a two-thirds vote. However, if they want to take advantage of current law that allows them to share some of that energy with another nearby public agency, the way I would read this is that a two-thirds vote would be required. And so this would be a significant narrowing of current law with respect to public entities generating local renewables. And I wanted to ask for your assessment of that.
Right, then they may, but we would be certainly happy to check on that for you to confirm that either way.
Assemblymember Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could call upon your expertise to help me sort of understand the finances involved with the expansion of electrical services during our current climate with renewable goals and AB 32 and et cetera. Has that become an easier thing to accomplish for electrical providers, or would you say that it's that there are more and new costs associated with the expansion of electrical service into new areas?
I think, Mr. Swanson, there certainly are increased regulatory requirements and goals, such as you mentioned, sort of the renewables portfolio standard that affects investor-owned utilities, and it's a goal set for publicly owned utilities as well. So, so to the extent that you expand, there are a number of new requirements that need to be met that do impact costs, certainly.
And would that also involve, from a financial standpoint, would that also involve new infrastructure investment by the utility to be able to accomplish this goal that in this ambitious environment of compliance with our goals, AB 32 and our renewables?
Certainly, potentially.
Okay. I mean, could you elaborate on that a minute? I mean, when I say infrastructure, it may mean the development of new infrastructure delivery systems and the like. Are we talking about that?
It could be generation, it could be distribution, it could be transmission, it could be all three.
And since so would you say that in California specifically, given our goals, that that the proposition of moving forward on expansion of electricity, that there are financial challenges, and for local entities there may be financial risks associated with that. Is that right?
Yes, I would say that there would be financial challenges and probably risk across the board.
Okay. So am I? I'm just trying to understand the rationale between public consent and the risks that may be involved in moving forward. Not that we're all interested in efficient delivery systems, and we're interested in reducing the carbon footprint. Those are very important goals, and so I'm just curious about whether or not the public, as they are looking at this, or any entity that would expose the public to these particular challenges, whether or not there's a thorough examination of that public risk and the capability to deliver. If there's a failure, then that could result in additional rate increases. If there's a success, then it could result in something else. But I was trying to understand from a financial standpoint, you would argue that these decisions would have to be made carefully, because of all those risks that are involved.
Clearly, yeah, it's a very complex area that involves a lot of fiscal choices as well as policy choices as well. Currently, most of that decision-making is done by either a select group of voters or just by the local agency decision-makers, as opposed to going out to the voters. So it's changing the process.
So it becomes a balance between balancing risk and voter consent, and making sure that, in fact, this is a very important decision, needs to be made in an environment where the voters are clear of the risks that are involved.
Crux of the issue, I think.
Thank you.
Have Assemblymember Amiano, Senator Leno for a second time after him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to participate today. On the floor this morning, I think we passed a resolution about not swearing, so I'm going to try to abide by that resolution. And I understand the position that your office is in terms of doing this analysis. It appears to me this has a chilling effect. San Francisco is very unique. There are certain areas of the city that have been talking about public power before the whole city goes public power. We've gone to the ballot a few times and have not had the good luck that Sacramento has had. I'm thinking of Treasure Island, which is a part of our city. As it gets developed, they would opt into the city itself providing the power, not PG&E. We're looking into all that. So would you say effectively that plans in progress of that order would then be thwarted by this initiative, so that we would have to do the two-thirds, go to the ballot and do the two-thirds, even though the declaration of intent is there and actually some of the work has been done already? There's no grandfathering.
Right, unless it's already gone to the voters and been approved by the voters, that exception would not be in place. That's right.
Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2002, this is with regard to the CCA aspect of the initiative, Assemblywoman Migdon authored AB 117, which created the pathway for communities to pursue community choice aggregation. And in it, there's a section that reads, and I'm reading from it, all electrical corporations shall cooperate fully with any community choice aggregators that investigate, pursue, or implement community choice aggregation programs. Would you imagine that requiring a two-thirds majority vote for any pursuit of community choice aggregation is cooperating fully with any community choice aggregators?
It certainly places an extra hurdle to cooperation. I think is just a fair comment that it's a requirement that wasn't in Senator Migden's legislation that adds certainly would complicate the.
Where in the word or understanding of the word cooperation is there hurdle?
Yes, I'll best to have the others speak to that, but it certainly is a requirement that isn't in current law, and that makes community choice aggregation
a higher hurdle.
A higher hurdle, yeah.
Which to me doesn't sound like cooperating fully. And then, just to put a point on it, and then thank the chair once again. As this measure is written, which corporations in the state of California could possibly benefit from this limited competition that you've suggested may be possible?
Best to we certainly our analysis doesn't look at sort of particular sort of business beneficiaries there, but so
it's limited. I mean, this is not going to benefit Safeway.
Is not going to benefit
Safeway.
And I mean the direct benefit to business or corporations, I mean, outside the utility industry, would depend on the measure's impact on electricity rates, and to the extent that the measure sort of increased or decreased rates, I mean, that could be, if it served to decrease rates, and that is a possibility, then there could be a benefit just in terms of the cost of doing business in the state. But as we mentioned, though, the impact on rates can go either which way.
Would it benefit municipal utility districts?
Not a direct benefit.
Is there an indirect benefit to municipal utility districts? Is there any benefit?
Not the, I mean, in terms of affecting government agencies directly, the potential benefit is, again, on the rate side, which is, I mean, the electricity rate market is sort of statewide, so, but that's more of an indirect.
And will it benefit investor-owned utilities?
And potentially,
we're all adults here. I think we can have this conversation. It's all right.
yes.
I'm just saying, trying to understand what's going on here. We're talking about the well-being of the state of California.
Clearly,
is this good for California? Is it bad for California? And how this works?
And not our role to comment on the sort of the policy merits of the initiative, but clearly I mean, one potential consequence if the voters approve this initiative would that the mixture of public and privately provided power in the state could be different than it otherwise would be the case, and that's a policy. Whether that's good or bad, obviously, is a sort of.
I would not ask you if that's good or bad, but I just want to better understand what you said. So it won't benefit munis; it could benefit IOUs.
To the extent that it decreases competitive pressure.
To the extent that it decreases sort of competitive pressure and plans of local agencies that are planning to expand or thwarted, that would maintain the current. Sort of service territory and revenues of the IOUs.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Assemblymember Swanson for a second time, and then after.
Just a quick. Does the proposition, reduce the authority of the Public Utilities Commission in any way?
No, it does not.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Please don't go too far away. We may have questions as the hearing proceeds. But let's move on, members, to the second panel, which is made up of proponents of Proposition 16. Ed Bedwell on behalf of Pacific Gas and Electric, Mark Brigette on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, and Michelle Peelsticker on behalf of the California Taxpayers Association. A reminder that both this panel and the following panel, representatives of the opponent's side, were sort of self-selected. We'll afford up to 20 minutes on each side, just to be fair. And if we can hold our questions until the end of each panel, we'll allow them to get through their presentations. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Padilla, Chairman Fuentes, members of the committee, other members of the Senate and the Assembly. I'm Ed Bedwell with Pacific Gas and Electric. I'm the Senior Director of State and Local Government Relations for the company. PG&E is one of the supporters of Proposition 16, along with other business organizations, taxpayer groups, and labor. For background purposes, for those of you that don't know, Pacific Gas and Electric serves more than 15 million Northern and Central California customers in the approximate geographic area from Kern County in the south to just short of the Oregon border in the north. So what does Proposition 16 do, and why do we support it? Proposition 16 does one simple thing. It requires voter approval before local governments can spend money or incur public debt to get into the retail electric business. It does not prohibit municipal government or local government from entering into the retail electric business. It does require a 2/3 vote approval. Why are we involved? PG&E is committed to providing its customers with safe and reliable energy service throughout our service territory. That's our responsibility. That's what we're in business to do. And our mandates are carried out through the California Public Utilities Commission and through the state legislature. PG&E has been providing that service in our service territory of Northern and Central California for more than 100 years. We have a deep connection and commitment to our valued customers. When local governments enter into the retail electric business, it can cost taxpayers millions or possibly billions of dollars in public money or debt. These are potentially risky, long-term capital decisions that can have significant impact on local spending or other budget priorities. They may result in increased consumer electric rates, or, as Ledge Counsel and the analyst stated previous to our appearance here, they could lower it. In our opinion, they have an upward pressure because there is an acquisition cost, a significant acquisition cost. And those decisions are not easily reversed. If any alternative program to deliver retail electricity adversely impacts our customers, puts them at risk, or could possibly fail, PG&E believes its customers should be fully informed and aware of the risk. Remember that the failure of one of these programs will send those customers back to Pacific Gas and Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, or Southern California Edison, who have the obligation to serve that customer under current law. Why shouldn't the customer, the constituent, the voter, have a say in that decision? As in the case with many local government taxing and borrowing measures, Proposition 16 requires a 2/3 vote. This is not an insurmountable obstacle. It is the standard for general obligation non-school infrastructure bonds which taxpayers are responsible for. And since 2002, voters throughout the state have given their approval to hundreds of important projects locally with 2/3 majorities. So let me shift to what Proposition 16 does not do. It is not a power grab by the utilities designed to stifle competition. It does not stop the startup of new municipal retail electric service. It requires a vote. In recent years, the voters have made that decision in many jurisdictions and areas, but the current law does not require a vote. Prop 16 does not preclude local governments from studying or considering whether to initiate a community choice aggregation program. The initiative does not impact the funding of clean, renewable energy by local governments. In fact, those types of projects are specifically exempted from the initiative's provisions. Proposition 16 does not affect existing municipal utilities that are sole providers within their territories, such as LADWP, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, unless they wish to expand retail electric delivery service beyond their existing service territory. And the measure does not block public funding that has already been approved by the voters, or public funding used for purposes other than getting into the retail electric business. As many of you know, there have been numerous entrees into the power business over the last decade throughout the state of California. 2 years ago, there was the highly visible election in San Francisco, Measure H, which would have started the process of municipalization in the city. Years earlier, the SMUD annexation received a lot of attention. SMUD's proposal to take over PG&E service territory in Yolo County. That was decided by voters of both counties. So this proposition is not inconsistent with recent activity of either acquisition or takeover. Local government examination of providing retail electric service is not limited to just the PG&E service territory. This is not just about PG&E. Our IOU colleagues to the south have recently been involved with cities such as San Marcos and Corona and others looking to acquire investor-owned utility systems. As was recently reported in the Chronicle 4 days ago, the co-director of the Energy Institute at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, Severin Borenstein, a witness who has been before this body on numerous occasions in both chambers, stated the chances of actually saving money are, quote, pretty non-existent for any local government that gets into the power business. The idea, he said, is fraught with dangers given the complexities of the market. We couldn't agree with him more than that. And I can't find a better way to close my remarks as to why PG&E supports Proposition 16 and gives the voters the right to decide.
Before we get to the next speaker, members of the committee, question for us. The three members on this panel in front of us are the ones listed on the agenda. We saw no stranger to us, Scott Wetch, on behalf of organized labor, seeking to join in on this panel. Unless there's an objection from the committee, I'm comfortable allowing that. But if there's an objection from the committee, that was not something that was previously noticed. Is there an objection? Seeing none. Okay. Continue.
Chairman Padilla, Chairman Fuentes, and members of the committee, my name is Mark Burgatt. I'm the Vice President of the California Chamber of Commerce. We represent the employers in the state. We have over 16,000 members. We too are here today in support of Proposition 16. I think fundamentally the Chamber of Commerce and the business community believes that there is a higher level of scrutiny required anytime you use the taxpayers' money, especially this much of the taxpayers' money for this type of risky long-term involvement. And specifically when you're raising taxpayer money that will be used specifically to compete or replace a private business. We believe Prop 16 also prevents the municipal utility to cherry pick certain areas that would have a higher rate of return and leave those other areas to be serviced by the independent operators that would ultimately have a lower rate of return. And we believe these endeavors are not without significant risk. As we've heard from Dr. Bornstein, there are significant risks. There are significant long-term capital commitments to this sort of endeavor. And any time that you do that and you commit those funds long-term, we believe that fundamentally the voters should have an opportunity to vote on that. And ultimately, the Chamber of Commerce and the business community believe that the voters have a right to vote on anything that is this risky, this significant, this large amount of funds. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars for this long a period of time. And for those reasons, we support Proposition 16.
let's
You wanna
Submember Amiano.
take
Yeah,
the
let's
questions
the
of the
panel finish, and then we'll have questions of all of them.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Michelle Peelsticker, California Taxpayers Association. We associate ourselves with the comments of Mr. Bergat from Cal Chamber. And we'd also like to add that in expanding utility, a cost-benefit analysis is always in order, and we see this proposition as simply extending that cost-benefit analysis to the voters and allowing them to make that decision. A two-thirds vote is not an insurmountable barrier. Our records show that 62% of the parcel taxes placed on the ballot last year passed by a two-thirds vote, despite the fact that we're in tough economic times. And of those that were rejected, half failed to garner even a simple majority vote, making the two-thirds threshold a non-issue. So we welcome the right of taxpayers to decide whether their local government should incur debt that may impact other services as well as taxes and fees into the future. And for these reasons, we strongly support Proposition 16.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for allowing me to participate. I apologize there was a miscommunication amongst the proponents on who is going to be participating today. On behalf of the Coalition of Utility Employees, representing nearly all the employees at both the investor and municipally owned utilities, we support Proposition 16, particularly because our support comes from our disillusionment with community choice aggregation. Had we known today, then what we know today about the way these CCA proposals have unfolded when we went neutral on AB 117, and had we been aware of the industry, the cottage industry of consultants that it has spawned, and what we believe to be a lack of transparency oftentimes in the information provided in the local processes, we never would have gone along with AB 117. As this committee knows, and you, Mr. Chair, specifically, we believe we have a crisis in California in regards to our infrastructure, our transmission and distribution infrastructure. We believe that the investor-owned utilities are doing a fairly good job at trying to modernize the infrastructure. We have some grave concerns about the status of the distribution systems of many of the municipally owned utilities. And what we fear with community choice aggregation is that because the local authority has no obligations at all to worry about the maintenance and the adequate operations of the transmission and distribution system, that it creates downward pressure on getting those critical capital resources allocated through the PUC to be able to do that work. That they provide the power, but there's as rates are inflated at the local level, there is an incentive for the local communities to put pressure the PUC against any rate increases dedicated to T&D. And so we're very concerned with that, and for that reason we're supporting Proposition 16.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from members of the committee, beginning with the Submember Amiano.
Yeah, to either of you, but maybe the chamber. You want to elaborate on this, what has been referred to as a drafting error in the measure that has caused the realtors now to come out against it?
I can briefly. I think we believe that the realtors in their rush to oppose this have actually analyzed this incorrectly. We don't agree with the way that they've analyzed it. And I can defer to Mr. Bedwell, but I believe the key there is that this discusses expansion of retail electricity supply.
Assembly member, we would agree with that. We're in obvious disagreement with the realtors on this. As the Senate chair has indicated, the state has service. And if you get into the retail business, if this proposition were to pass, then this would come into play. But we do not see how the addition of a neighbor or annexation or across the street, how we can read that into this proposition.
Thank you, but I do think you're going to have an additional battle on your hands, and alienating those who are usually in your camp is not a good sign, and it doesn't show a lot of care was taken around this ballot measure, and it speaks to some of the salacious exaggerations that I've heard. But I'll leave that up to the opponents to address.
Member Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bedwell, I appreciate your testimony about the public policy rationale for this initiative, but it does cause me to wonder why the other investor-owned utilities are not supporting it if those arguments are so compelling statewide. Could you speak to why you're all alone on this one?
I don't know that we are all alone, but I cannot speak for Southern California Edison or for San Diego Gas and Electric.
Okay. The irony also has not escaped me that the current law that allows creation of community choice aggregation does not require two-thirds voter approval, and it's a law, if I'm not mistaken, that you supported a few years back. PG&E actually supported. Why did you support that policy framework at the time and suddenly feel so strongly that a dramatically different policy framework is essential?
Well, with regards to community choice aggregation, I think that what we have done is we have seen, it was alluded to by Mr. Wetch, I'll take a little bit of a cue from him. I think what you have in a number of circumstances with community choice aggregation is you have entities that are providing information that may lead some people to a conclusion that we find hard to believe. We are in the business of, as I indicated, of providing energy services, both gas and electric, to two-thirds of the geographic portion of the state of California. We believe that we know what the price of power is when you buy it in bulk like we do. And when people come in and make representations to aggregators, people interested in aggregation, and they make some of the claims that they have, we believe that we have an obligation to tell our customers that. And that's something that I don't think was envisioned in AB 117. When one of the examples I would offer you would be in Mr. Valine's area, where there was an effort to put a power authority together under the CCA umbrella. And when it was finally put on the table what they would actually be able to provide power for, or whether they could meet the claims of PG&E or of the aggregators, that entity is not in business today. So that's why we have taken a second look at some of the provisions of CCA, and why we have argued that we should have the opportunity to discuss the perils that go in, because as I stated in my testimony, if somebody has, the way CCA operates right now, as you know, is you have only the opt-out, you don't have the opt-in.
Right.
So you sign up for something, let's say you just don't like it, it doesn't work, or it doesn't meet the advertisements that have been put before you. Where does that customer go? He defaults back to the utility. And so therefore, as you know, having been on the committee, we then have to arrange for that power that we have since said, nope, that they've gone. It's an additional cost. It's not on, it's usually on the spot as opposed to in your procurement plan. So we think it's fraud and has impacts to our other customers.
So Mr. Bedwell, I want to follow up just on one piece of this. If there are problems with the CCA framework as to the representations that can be made, how folks go about forming a CCA that you believe are problematic, CCA is a creature of statute. Why wouldn't you bring a statute through this body to modify that policy framework, which we do all the time, and we could have taken a look at that in an open and deliberative way as it moved through the legislature instead of going to an initiative?
Well, I don't think this initiative is just targeted at CCA.
So did you consider legislation, or was this
We
just...
have not considered legislation, and we have not been approached by anybody else on legislation.
And why not?
I couldn't tell you.
I want to ask about the threshold. As I understand your initiative, it's sort of a one-way process. If folks want to go the route of public power, they've got this 2/3 vote requirement. But what if a community or an area that's served currently by public power decides they want out of that and they want to come into PG&E's service? Would there be a similar 2/3 vote requirement in that situation?
Assembly member, it's my understanding that in that scenario, by law currently, there does have to be a vote, and you do have to have the 2/3 threshold. There was a situation several years ago following the energy crisis where there was a municipal utility in the Central Valley that was struggling mightily, and they had considered actually, let me rephrase that. There were a couple of board members who had considered the possibility of going back to an investor-owned utility, and they would have had to hit the 2/3 threshold.
In their service area?
Yes.
Are you aware legally why that would be? Because that strikes me as surprising.
I don't have it in front of me, but I will get you the law.
Okay.
It's in the statute.
All right, thank you.
Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions for Mr. Bedwell and also for Mr. Brigott. Following up on Assemblyman Huffman's line of questioning, I think you can't just tell us you don't know. When asked, why didn't you come back to the legislature to amend a statute created by the legislature? Can you give us some better reasoning than I don't know?
Well, I believe that we, through the PUC, through the CCA organizations, primarily the three that we've dealt with thus far, San Joaquin Valley Power Authority, Marin Energy, and believe it's the Clean Power in San Francisco, we believe that we are working within the framework of the statute to deal with those three. If there was something in every law that the legislature passed that we didn't like, I think we'd have a pretty lengthy bill list. So
Do you take them all to the ballot?
Pardon me?
Do you take them all to the ballot?
No, we would not take them all to the ballot. But again, as I said to Assemblymember Huffman, if this is an attempt to say that this is a run on CCA, we would disagree with you. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. The word I believe I used was target.
Target,
yes.
Right. So you may interpret it that way, but I'd like to share with the committee, Mr. Chair, just a few lines of a letter that was sent on the President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg's letterhead, co-signed by me and a handful of my Senate colleagues, addressed to Peter Darby, the Chairman and CEO of PG&E Corporation, a letter to which we never got a response. It reads, PG&E's willingness to use the initiative process to unwind a carefully negotiated statute that PG&E supported lacks the mutual respect and honor that the legislature expects from stakeholders in the legislative process. If PG&E has recanted its support of CCA, it has an obligation to seek those revisions in the legislature, to use the initiative process to pursue PG&E's self-interest and avoid engaging your partners in the AB 117 agreement calls into question your company's integrity. So you may think this is a small matter, but we here take it very seriously. And for us not even to get a response from your chairman is only a double slap in the face. If you've got a problem, and I understand you have a different assessment of CCA today than you did at the time that you supported AB 117, for you not to come back here, express your grievance, hold public hearings, propose legislation, and respectfully engage the legislative process really does not reflect well upon PG&E's participation in the legislative process. And we don't take it lightly. You had said earlier, Mr. Bedwell, that this measure is not inconsistent with SMUD's ballot battle over YOLO with you or Prop H in San Francisco. Was the YOLO vote or Prop H a two-thirds majority vote?
No, the YOLO was a vote of both jurisdictions, both the acquiring and the complete service territory. That's the area I was referring to. Yes.
Simple majority threshold?
Yes, and the San Francisco was a vote as opposed to just an action by a political jurisdiction.
And you don't care to correct your statement? This is not inconsistent with a simple majority vote?
I will amend my statement that it did not include the two-thirds vote.
This is not an insignificant difference.
I would disagree with you on the insignificant difference. I stand corrected, as you've brought out. In both those cases, the point I was attempting to make was in those jurisdictions, the electorate had a vote on the matter.
And can you describe to us how Prop 16 exemplifies your abiding by the statute of AB 117 in cooperating fully?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I'll read again from the language of AB 117. All electrical corporations shall cooperate fully with any community choice aggregators that investigate, pursue, or implement community choice aggregation programs. So could please describe how 116 is consistent with that? Prop 16 is consistent with that.
I think that what it does is, again, before you get into these situations, you have a full airing of the electorate before you get into either the municipalization of the facilities or the community choice aggregation. And I don't see how that's necessarily inconsistent. The cooperation aspect of it, I believe, is in the implementation of that program once an entity has gone down that path.
Two-thirds majority vote is higher threshold than a simple majority.
Yes.
It's a higher bar,
Yes.
harder to attain.
Yes.
I think the LAO used the word hurdle.
High bar.
High bar. Okay. How is a high bar in any way consistent with cooperate fully? Why would you put a high bar into the equation when you supported legislation which said you would cooperate fully?
Again, I think that all this does is it provides the electorate in that jurisdiction to have the opportunity to say to that municipal entity, do you want to go down the path? I don't see it's a matter of cooperation or lack of cooperation. Okay. I think the cooperation is relevant to the statute once you get there.
Did you propose that as an amendment to AB 117 before you supported the language cooperate fully?
I do not know if we provided that as an amendment.
I doubt that you did.
I do not know.
It's not in the bill, clearly, and you supported the bill without it.
Correct. The bill that passed was not the original bill that was introduced.
Why not come back to the legislature with this measure? And then one last question for Mr. Ragat. And I suspect you can answer a little more forthrightly because you're not the legislative analyst's office, and I respect that office completely. Will Prop 16, if passed and enacted, expand competition into the electrical market?
I don't know that Prop 16 has the effect of increasing or decreasing competition. I think that Prop 16 simply sets up a vote of the electorate to decide who they want to provide their electricity.
Puts a high bar in front of any community choice aggregation that wasn't in the original AB 117. We all recognize that. It's not my words, it's Mr. Bedwell. High bar. So a high bar encourages competition or discourages competition?
I think the threshold issue for the business community here is the act of the government being responsible to the electorate, and the electorate being involved in communicating its wish, whether that be to have a municipal utility or a privately owned utility supply its electricity, and more than that, having a say, whether that's regardless of how you choose to describe the hurdle, being able to have a say in how its government commits itself and the funds that they raise from their constituents on long-term investments.
In effect, I think it will be recognized that this measure is an anti-competition measure, and I just think that it's pretty astounding that the California Chamber of Commerce would actually support a measure that in effect, whether intended or otherwise, will in fact, because of a high bar specifically put onto the ballot as a constitutional amendment, will indeed limit competition. I would suggest by design. And Mr. Chair, you've been very gracious with your time. I just want to share with the committee the final paragraph of an editorial from the Sacramento Bee dated Tuesday, January 19th of this year. The PG&E ballot measure is another troubling example of the initiative process going dangerously awry in California, of a powerful special interest seizing the initiative process for its own narrow benefit. The measure the utility is bankrolling is not a simple statute. It is a constitutional amendment. If it passes, it enshrines unfair protections against competition for PG&E, one of the richest, most powerful corporations in the state, into the California Constitution. It is unusual for the Bee to come out against a ballot measure before the campaign has really started. The PG&E initiative deserves special attention. It's that bad. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orlando. Member Huffman. All right, I've refrained
Just
from chastising the audience thus far, but there have been outbursts, there have been applause. I need you guys to keep it in check. Member Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I wanted to come back, Mr. Bedwell, to this issue of whether this two-thirds requirement flows both ways. And you've said that you're familiar with a situation where an area served by a public authority thought about going to an IOU service arrangement, and there was some kind of a two-thirds vote requirement. I'm not aware of anything like that. I've checked with committee staff. They likewise don't know of any legal requirement why that would be the case, but maybe you can provide me with that authority offline. I'll be happy to receive it. In any case, I think it is fair to say that under the construct of your initiative, if PG&E were extending its service territory to bring in a new community, for example, there would be no requirement for a two-thirds vote. However, if a municipal authority was annexing a new area, there would be. And so it does appear that there's something of a double standard in this initiative, and the only way I can sort of justify that would be if the assumption in this initiative is that it's inherently riskier to go from private power to public power. And so I just wanted to ask you, is that fair to say that an underlying assumption here is that going to public power is inherently riskier than staying with an IOU?
Well, I won't comment on the riskier going to public power. As the analyst indicated, there are some instances where municipal does have higher rates and costs and so forth. I would say that in the example that you gave me in that question, I'm assuming that we would already have that service territory right now, the way you asked the question of the annexation, because that greenfield, if you will, right, is already assigned to a provider. As Senator Padilla said, every spot of land in California has somebody with the obligation to serve it. So I'm assuming that in the PG&E service territory, it would either be an adjoining muni municipal publicly owned utility or an investor-owned utility, which would be us, we would not have the obligation to vote as that development occurred. But we also, in the utility business right now, have the obligation to plan and begin to prepare to serve for that. So there is a cost that of acquiring that land, that service territory, that's incurred, that, you know, how expensive it is or how inexpensive it is for the POU to serve, I couldn't answer that.
Well, it is true, though.
Whether it's riskier.
Yeah. It is true, though, that your initiative is a one-way approach to this. It is that moving from private to public requires two-thirds, but and you could have provided that same threshold across the board for any kind of change in power service, regardless of which direction, right? But you chose not to.
We chose to put this initiative on to give Californians the right to determine who was going to serve them.
And it does seem to me that that reflects a policy that you're asking the state of California to adopt that says there's a higher threshold when you go to any kind of public power. And I would just point out that it is my understanding that notwithstanding the rather memorable bankruptcy that we saw with PG&E not too long ago, that we've never experienced a situation where a public power authority, I realize bankruptcy is not an option for public entities, but where insolvency or failure occurred during that same time frame. So I just...
I would offer that during that same time frame that we struggled mightily, as did Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric. There were other municipal or publicly owned utilities that financially, to use a phrase, took a beating as well. And the entity that I referred to, in part, was driven to their dire financial situation and came close to that going below, if you will, in part because of the energy crisis. So we were not alone. And Assemblymember Huffman,
Yes.
if I can just try and answer your question. I believe the reference, we'll get this to you and to the committee, is Public Utility Code Section 10055 and 10051. But we'll follow up with you to your office.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Have Assemblymember Swanson, followed by Assemblymember Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of the State Assembly, I know this body can be dysfunctional at times, and so I'm not going to criticize the initiative process. I think that is part of our democracy, and it's part of an option that should be available to everyone to pursue important questions. Part of the purpose of this public hearing is to help sort out for the public pros and cons of Proposition 16, and I wanted to just give you a chance to elaborate more on those objectives, the positive objectives that are inherent in what motivates this proposition. And so I would ask Mr. Wetch, is it right? The assumption is that the workforce is concerned, well, I guess, about stability and sustainability, in a industry that doesn't have peaks and valleys, but in fact can sustain and pay for itself into the future and support a workforce that they can be relied on that. How does that play into this proposition and how this matter is trying to go forward?
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Scott Wetch on behalf of the Coalition of Utility Employees. We're highly skeptical of the ability of CCAs to be able to deliver retail service at a cost below what the existing munis or the existing investor-owned utilities can. I think it's important to remember that with the exception of a few very small, tiny municipal utilities, the majority of the municipal utilities in the state of California have been around since the 1940s. They have a great deal of experience in the energy markets. They own some of their own generation. In the cases of the investor-owned utilities, they have depreciated generation assets that are very efficient in providing power to the ratepayers, specifically the nuclear power facilities and the large hydro that PG&E has, for instance. So the concern that we have is that the figures and the projections that we've seen by some of these consultants that have a financial interest in getting CCAs passed are so inadequate that the reality to the locally elected official who will find themselves sitting on the board is going to be dramatic. And it's going to necessitate going back to their constituents and getting significant rate increases approved to make the whole thing work. At the same time, we're fighting a constant battle at the Public Utilities Commission to get built into the rate base an adequate amount of funding to ensure that the infrastructure system that we have in California is adequate. It was not built, for instance, most transformers that are in use today that are come from the 50s were not put in place with the idea of a household having 4 flat-screen plasma TVs and 3 computer systems and hard drives and all kinds of other appliances, and the load on that is tremendous. And we saw that in Los Angeles when we had power outages for over a week last summer. So we're constantly fighting a fight at the PUC to get built into the rate base of the IOUs adequate capital funds to be able to upgrade those systems. We're afraid that as these communities choose CCA and they're faced with the reality of instituting larger rates than they perhaps had envisioned, it will create downward pressure for then those same communities to lobby the PUC to keep rates down on the transmission and distribution portion, which the utilities maintain. So they don't have to worry about who's paying. They don't have to worry about the obligation of keeping a system together. They're just going to be concerned with keeping rates low because of the situation they face with their constituents. And that's the rub that we're very, very concerned with.
Okay. And let me just ask, I asked Mr. Bedwell if he could respond to this, but I asked the LAO earlier about the question of risks involved with the expansion of service. And you brought up an additional point that I hadn't thought about, and that's the cost centers involved in that risk in terms of, as the chair has indicated, the continual supplying of services in a failed environment. If expansion fails, then there's some costs associated with that question. And so the two parts of this question deals with, in this new environment that we have and the infrastructure requirements that are going forward, significant capital investment, how does that play into the this question of motive and as this matter is going forward, at least in part of the public debate that has to be had around this initiative that speaks to the question of risk?
Well, I don't know that I can discuss the motive because I don't think there's a motive here, other than the fact that PG&E and Southern California Edison, to a lesser extent San Diego, have all had governmental challenges to their institution, if you will. And we, at the end of the day, either through contact through customers or contact through elected officials, not many of these have gone forward in recent years. The risk, if you will, Assembly Member, is that, as Mr. Wetch pointed out, the energy business has changed dramatically since the energy crisis. Our economy, even though it's a little soft today, is different than it was 10, 15 years ago. We saw that with increased demand 5 to 8 years ago when servers, these large server farms, were moving peak load up. Instead of peaking at the end of the Sunday, if you will, we now see the peak going well into the evening, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So a utility that gets into this business, or a CCA that gets into this business, is a completely different business than it was 10 years ago. When those customers, as I alluded to, as during the energy crisis, which Mr. Huffman brought up, When direct access failed, or when direct access marketers or providers walked away or said, we're done, we're out of California for all of their reasons, where did the customers go? They defaulted back to the investor-owned utility, who then, as Mr. Huffman pointed out, we were a little hurting right there at that point financially. And so the risk was it comes back to our customers to pick it up for them. We pick those customers back up because we have the obligation to serve under law. So we do believe there's a risk if these things aren't thought out, if they're not well planned. As is mentioned, there's a cottage industry out there, folks, that say, we can make you money. The argument a couple of years ago was, we can put money in your general fund. And those have not panned out. So when we have, to Senator Leno's point about cooperation, I would view cooperation maybe, well, obviously a little bit different than Senator Leno does. But in the discussion and the debates that we have, on MEA with the proponents, we have attempted to raise what we believe are the risks. Are you sure when you say you can deliver at 25, 20, 15, whatever your price cut is, and the product is this? Is that what you can really deliver? Because we buy every day in large quantities, billions of dollars of power, and we just frankly question how they can do it. So the risk for them is financial. I'd refer you to talk to the treasurer of Marin County, where Marin's a hotbed right now. He has a fiduciary responsibility to that jurisdiction from the financial side. He is an opponent. There are many proponents of MEA, but he is, from the financial side and the risk, a strong opponent. And I can refer you to either him or his comments. So that's what I view as the risk in this.
Well, thank you very much.
Assemblymember Swanson, again, if I could just comment real quick. When we talk about risk, I think one of the questions that was brought up before was, is there that there's a higher threshold to go to a municipal than from to a private? And while I can't talk about whether it's riskier to be with an MOU or with a muni or with an IOU, I can speak to the fact of who bears the burden of that risk. And when you have a company like PG&E or SDG&E or Edison, the risk is borne by a private industry. If there are problems in that market, then that private industry bears that risk and that burden. If it is with a municipal utility, then that risk is ultimately borne by the taxpayers who are footing the bill for that. And as Mr. Wetch and Mr. Bedwell mentioned before, oftentimes they have to come back in and try and get higher rates because the rate of return that they thought they were going to get, or the profit margin they thought they were going to get, simply is not there. This is a very capital intensive with a long rate of return type business. And many municipals are not ready for that. And so, we believe that when you have that risk on the taxpayer who will ultimately bear the burden of whether that industry survives or thrives, we feel that there should be more scrutiny on that. And again, this is one of the reasons why the Chamber of Commerce is here, because as that industry has problems, and say a PG&E is forced to come in, this could ultimately lead to higher rates. It could also lead to higher pressure to raise taxes or raise fees, all of which are then handled in large part, I would say, by the California employer community.
Well, thank you. You have answered my question.
Assemblymember Skinner.
Thank you. I want to go back to a question that Mr. Huffman raised, where he pointed out that the measure as written is very narrowly defined, very narrowly construed, in that it requires a 2/3 approval only for if a local government is making a switch in terms of the electricity provider or plans to. And what Mr. Huffman asked is, why so narrowly construed? Because you could conceivably have a circumstance where, say, an existing muni were to go out of business, and the IOU the territory, if it was adjacent to an IOU territory, then the IOU might be in this circumstance to take on those customers. And yet the initiative is not designed such that that new set of customers, that locality, would have to vote by 2/3 as to whether they would be under that service. And you answered that the purpose of the measure was to protect, in effect, what I'm going to interpret that from is protect ratepayers somehow. And yet, if that was in fact the intent, why isn't this a 2/3 requirement for any change in electric service provision?
I don't know if you were here at the time, but I believe we addressed, or we're working off of BlackBerry here, so we've referenced a code section in which we believe we have a citation that says that the same has to occur for an investor-owned utility in the scenario you described.
Okay. All right, but it wouldn't, so now I
It's existing law.
understand. So, but it wouldn't be for annexations, only for...
The way I understand the law, and again, I would be happy to have this in more detail if I had the law in front of me to read. I believe it is for any acquisition of non-IOU held service territory.
Okay.
Members, any additional questions? Very good. Very good, Senator Leonard.
Again, it's just confounding that no one can at least be as forthright as Chairman Peter Darby has been with regard to this limiting of competition. And I think that in this setting, we should be speaking directly to each other and with as much forthrightness as possible. This is from the Mercury News editorial opposing Prop 16. It says that in an October earnings call with analysts, PG&E executives made it clear they are eager to retain market share. And this is a quote from Peter Darby. "We value our customers very much, and we are going to stand up and resist efforts to take over our customers." This is all about limiting competition, amending the state constitution so one corporation can limit its competition. I'm just amazed that the Chamber of Commerce can support this. I understand PG&E can support this, but amazed that the Chamber of Commerce can support this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Members, any additional questions? Mr. Bedwell, did you want to?
Senator, if I may, Senator, I would stand obviously by the chairman's comments. We, as I said in my prepared remarks, we value our customers. We believe that over the period of time we have a much better understanding of what our customers want. We have an interaction and a relationship with our customers. I think through the last 6 to 7 years in San Francisco over the debate of public power in San Francisco with PG&E, you know that we're very committed to retaining our customers there, as we are throughout all of our service territory. So that statement, I think, is a very valid statement and one that Peter Darby has a great deal of fervor behind.
Mr. Bedwell, I'm a PG&E customer in San Francisco, both in my home and at my business. And I'm a SMUD customer at my home here in Sacramento. I pay PG&E 25% more, and I get more green power here in Sacramento for the lower cost. And my small business suffers regularly blackouts in San Francisco because the lack of investment in infrastructure is that significant. I pay more if I had better service. I've never had a blackout here in Sacramento once.
Mr. Huffman.
Mr. Chair, you'll be glad this is my last comment because I have to leave.
I will be.
But I want to thank the witnesses for their patience and their answers. And I just want to say, as I leave this hearing, and thanks again for having it, I have worked with PG&E, and there have been times when we've crossed swords. I've been quick to praise PG&E when it shows leadership, like pulling out of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce over their refusal to do the right thing on global warming. I applaud you for that. Today, I am scratching my head and wondering, what is PG&E thinking? It is with great regret that I got to tell you, I think this is a terrible initiative, and with all due respect and with hopes that we will get back to working together on better public policy initiatives, I have to just sort of state my position for the record on that one, and thank you again for the hearing.
Very good. Thank you, panel, for your participation. Let's go ahead and bring up the panel number 3, the opponents to Proposition 16. That would be John Giesman, former chair of the California Energy Commission, Paul Hauser, director of Reading Electric Utility, Michael Bocadero, executive director of the Agricultural Energy Consumers Association, and Supervisor Ross Mirkarimi from District 5, the city of San Francisco. Gentlemen, happy to start, please.
Thank you, Mr. Fuente. I'm John Giesman. You promoted me. I was not the chair. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be heard in opposition to Proposition 16. I delivered my first legislative testimony before your predecessor committees in 1975. In the ensuing 35 years, besides spending 2 decades in the bond markets, I served as the executive director of the California Energy Commission when Jerry Brown was governor, as the chairman of the California Power Exchange during our disastrous experience with incompetent market regulation, as a board member of the Cal ISO when Governor Davis asserted state authority over that body, and as the attorney member of the California Energy Commission from 2002 to 2008, chairing its renewable energy and power plant siting committees. I'm proud to say that we licensed 26 power plants and 1 transmission line during my most recent tenure, the CEC. I'm retired now, but spend much of my volunteer time as the co-chair of the American Council on Renewable Energy, prodding governments around the world to recalibrate their energy policies in order to accelerate the pace of technological change. Never in all of that time or in any of those venues have I seen political activity by a regulated utility so far outside the bounds of acceptable conduct as PG&E's sole sponsorship of the constitutional amendment politely referred to as Proposition 16. I'm mindful of the contempt of the legislative process, reliance on deceptive wording, and resort to strong-arm tactics that are manifest in PG&E's campaign. But today I want to take Proposition 16 at face value and focus your attention on 3 tapeworms that eat away at the internal logic of the measure itself. Tapeworm number 1 is the elimination of customer choice. Who among us in today's economy doesn't recognize that fewer choices mean higher prices? That's true for any commodity. Yet Proposition 16 actually wants to restrict the ability of electricity consumers to buy from anyone other than for-profit monopolies. Has California ever faced a greater need to bring downward competitive pressures on the price of electricity? But PG&E wants to lock its monopoly advantage into the state constitution. Tapeworm number 2 is the mystery of where all of this campaign money is coming from. PG&E says it will spend up to $35 million and insists all of that money will come from its shareholders. You and I know that every nickel that passes through PG&E's books comes from its captive customers. Its regulated utility is the only business PG&E has. The CPUC determines what PG&E's cost of capital should be in order to provide for investment in needed infrastructure. But it sure doesn't set that rate at a level calculated to create a $35 million slush fund for sole-sponsored political adventurism. It ought to be illegal to take ratepayer money and use it politically against ratepayer interests. If PG&E is making an excessive return, it ought to give the money back. Tapeworm number 3 is a serious drafting error in the grandfather clause of Proposition 16. The authors attempted to exempt existing municipal utilities operating within their current territories, but they used an outmoded and unworkable sole provider definition. That means that within the 48 existing munis, every new connection, every new home buyer, every new business would be subject to an election requiring the approval of 2/3 of the voters. That's the kind of drafting mistake the legislative committee process is designed to prevent. 3 tapeworms are enough to kill even the meanest dog, and you ought to do what you can to put this mongrel down. Your colleagues in the Senate who signed on to the Steinberg letter in December had it right. PG&E should acknowledge its mistake, abandon its campaign, and bring whatever grievance it thinks it has back to the legislature for further consideration. Thank you.
Very good. Who's next?
I'll be next. Good afternoon. My name's Paul Hooser. I'm the Electric Utility Director for the City of Reading, and I'm here to inform you about the potential impacts of Proposition 16 to the City of Reading. I want to apologize up front because I want to deviate from my prepared comments. Based on some of the assertions that the proponents made, I just feel obligated to set the record straight because there were some implications that somehow municipal utility providers are incompetent or incapable of reliably serving residents, and I'm going to throw out some statistics that I keep with me all the time to maybe demonstrate otherwise. Reading's a medium-sized city. We have about 90,000 residents. The Reading Electric Utility has served those residents reliably since 1921. We currently have a peak of about 250 megawatts, so we're extremely small compared to a PG&E. But we own generation, transmission, distribution. We have a portfolio that's 64% carbon-free. And as a demonstration of our success, we collect about $100 million in retail revenues from our entire rate base. We serve the city limits. If we were to apply PG&E's rate structure to our customers, they would pay $140 million for the same service. To put that in perspective, that's more than $440 more confiscated for every man, woman, and child in the city of Reading. That's in a county with an unemployment rate of 16%. It would be absolutely devastating. We also participate in wholesale markets. We issue bonds for infrastructure and capital. So even though we're small, we do those things that the investor-owned utilities do. For the privilege of paying $40 million less collectively for electricity, we also have an exceptional reliability record. The average outage, if you look back at the last 5 years for our customers, they average less than 20 minutes per year of outage. That number is 5 times higher for PG&E in our area. So I think those broad numbers kind of demonstrate that municipal utilities aren't incompetent or incapable of providing reliable electric service to our customers. To get into just a few specifics, because we have other speakers here and time is limited, City Council on December 1st of 2009, Reading City Council unanimously approved a resolution opposing Proposition 16, primarily on economic grounds. We recently have constructed or started a Stillwater Business Park in Reading, and as you could tell from the 16% unemployment rate, economic growth is very vital to the city of Reading. Right now, one of the key marketing issues for the Stillwater Business Park is our local electric utilities, low rates, and reliable service. If Prop 16 were to pass in the future, it would be extremely difficult to create a business park like that outside our existing boundaries. Well, it would be unlikely we would do so because we'd lose that ability to market our utilities' lower rates and reliable service. For this reason and many others, the City Council's passed this resolution unanimously opposing Proposition 16. And I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you. Who's going to follow? Mr. Bocadero?
Michael Bocadero on behalf of the Ag Energy Consumers Association. We're apparently the part of the business community not represented by the State Chamber. We've represented the interests of agriculture before this legislature for the past 20 years. We've intervened on behalf of agriculture at the Public Utilities Commission for the past 20 years. We've got about 40,000 individual growers that are part of our coalition, including all the state's leading ag associations and major water agencies. We've got a great deal of experience working with customers and the investor-owned utilities known as irrigation districts in the Central Valley, Modesto, Turlock, Merced, and others that do a fine job of providing competitive electric service to PG&E. We've also had a fairly cooperative relationship with PG&E. We've done some great things together, including converting a bunch of diesel engines back to electricity to improve air quality in the valley. So our position in opposition to Proposition 16 was not taken lightly, but like the others we've heard about CCA, this will have a chilling effect on competition, not just from CCA, but from the irrigation districts as well. And it's very, very important competition. I've handed out a chart that shows some of the competitive rates compared for agricultural customers in the state. The rates are about half of what PG&E's comparative rates for similar agricultural customers are. And so that level of competition is very, very important to the agricultural community, and this proposition will have a chilling effect on any further development of competition. They're not doing this to protect ratepayers. We're their ratepayers. They're not doing this to protect us. They're doing this to protect shareholders. Let's not dance around that the way PG&E did. That's perfectly clear. If they wanted to protect ratepayers, they have an opportunity to withdraw the $1 billion rate increase that they filed earlier this year at the Public Utilities Commission. That rate increase is an example of the sort of rate increases we think we're going to see in the future as a result of a lack of competition. $1 billion a year increase at a time when we're trying to pull this economy out of its recession. That's $1 billion to the people, the families that are trying to stay in their homes. That's $1 billion to the workers who are trying to keep their jobs and the businesses that are trying to keep their doors open. From a farmer perspective, we're in a very significant water crisis. During water crises, we use additional electricity because we're not getting surface water supplies. We're forced to use groundwater. And so rate increases of this nature have a chilling effect on the farm community because we're using higher priced power from PG&E. At the same time, we're being forced to pump additional groundwater and use additional electricity. So we are extremely concerned with the nature of the proposition and the chilling effect that it's going to have on competition. Let me just conclude with two suggestions. You got one from Mr. Giesman that I think is a good one. The legislature really, I understand, can't do anything with the proposition, but we really do need to explore the relationship between the regulated utility and the parent corporation. Senator Dunn went down this path a few years ago, and it may be time again. That corporation was created at a time that was designed to protect ratepayers when PG&E had a number of unregulated businesses that were also part of the corporation. Those businesses are all bankrupt now or gone, and so maybe it's time that the legislature took a very hard look at whether or not that parent corporation needs to exist. And then secondly, if PG&E really believes that ratepayers should have a right to vote, then maybe ratepayers ought to have a right to vote on rate increases in the future. And establishing the same two-thirds threshold, I'd even opt for a majority threshold. I'd be fine with that. To give us an opportunity as to whether or not we wanted to see a $1 billion rate increase, I think would be a very positive move that folks in the legislature could take a look at in terms of these significant impacts that these types of rate increases have on customers. Thank you.
Very good, Supervisor.
Good afternoon. I'm Ross McArimi, Supervisor, District 5 in San Francisco. Delighted to be here, honorable committee members. I also chair LAFCO in the city and county of San Francisco. I'm delighted to be the state senate's appointee, one of the appointees to the California Coastal Commission as well. I had prepared remarks, but I have to tell you I was quite inspired by the remarks of PG&E and the Chamber of Commerce and others to slightly deviate from what I think I wanted to share with you. I am completely amazed at the shameful and brazen arrogance by PG&E to stand here before you to simply try to justify their desire to kill all competition and use the voter process in order to validate that particular aim. It almost makes me nostalgic, quite frankly, in listening back to the days of the congressional hearings when the tobacco industry was trying to remark on how smoking is good for you. That is exactly on par with what PG&E and those who advocate for them, I think, are doing right here. What is at risk is our democracy. And drawing recently, I think, from the Supreme Court ruling that unchecked I think, corporate influence in our political landscape nationally. So goes, I think, to the landscape of what PG&E is doing by flouting our democracy here in California. Tensions are well known in San Francisco and PG&E at times because unlike any other region in this country or in California, we own our assets. We were bequeathed Hetch Hetchy in 1917. We have attempted on numerous occasions in order to try to seek some independence in helping diversify our energy portfolio. Through public power campaigns, which I am a veteran of, and through other legislative and electoral means, we have sought to simply try to aspire to the wishes of many ratepayers and the citizens of San Francisco in doing better than what PG&E is able to deliver. But we thought we found a happy medium, and that was through the passage of Assembly Bill 117. Because of the bill, in and itself allowed for peaceful coexistence, and so that both PG&E, who gets to remain and who is headquartered in San Francisco, in order to provide the service that they have done so for decades, and allowing us to be able to provide an alternative service should the people elect for that particular service. That is our right. It is a statutory right that has been provided by the state legislature, and we appreciate that determination. For nearly 8 years, almost in line at the time that we've been paying for PG&E's bankruptcy, the same time that we've been preparing for us to be able to sculpt our own community choice aggregation program. We've appreciated that PG&E has remained neutral up until this particular point, but seeing that our endeavors now may be actualized into some meaningful reality is now where we're seeing PG&E begin to exercise their old selves in trying to subvert the very will that they had contributed in initially hoping would become a reality that we could all coexist by. This is what's dangerous, because it's not just the initiative process in itself that PG&E is simply trying to alter the landscape of which they said that they would abide by. It's what they're good at. We have seen most recently in 2008 in a campaign that even PG&E referred to as Proposition H in a locality like San Francisco where they had recorded over $10 million in a slight change of our law and how we would be able to modify the ability of having some municipal deliverance of energy in itself compared to the advocates who'd spent less than $50,000. $10 million to $50,000. By PG&E saying what they have said boldly in saying that it's up to the voters' right, it's up to the voters' right because they know they get to control the political landscape because of the unchecked influence of money within our initiative process or within the political arena so that they're able to win and win by blitzkrieg efforts. Those blitzkrieg efforts have been well known even when it's not electorally driven at the initiative process. For example, other municipalities and regions who seek CCA or public power or some hybrid version thereof have been inundated by leaflets, as we are now in San Francisco, in mailers that distort and misrepresent exactly what it is that we're attempting to do. If those don't succeed in itself by not creating a surgency that PG&E would like, then they go to community groups and they well splay their dollars and to try to pay off community groups using shareholder or rate payer money, certainly and try to buy, I think, those advocates in those particular communities. And it's effective. We've seen this for decades. And then thirdly, of course, they'll try to win at the ballot box and win at all costs. As brazen as them as the Chronicle had reported that they will spend upwards to $35 million. We're not going to be able to amass that kind of war chest, nor should we have to. And the fact that they would actually manipulate the very process of using a simple majority ballot in order to impose a two-thirds entitlement within this state's constitution is absolutely absurd. And it should be laughed out of the political arena anywhere here in Sacramento, just like I think Prop 17 should be as well, too. And just in the same way that I think that we are taking a complete hit on the chin by allowing our democracy to be completely undermined when you see corporate overlords like PG&E take control of our political landscape and our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Questions from members of the committee, committees? You don't have to. But if you'd like to, Senator Leto.
I'll go second.
I think you're the only one in the queue.
Thank you all for your presentations. Refreshing, to say the least. Mr. Giesman, did you hear PG&E counter your third tapeworm explanation today?
No, I have not.
So no one seems to be debating the point that you've made there.
I think simply walking through the language in the proposed amendment makes clear that in order to be exempted, an existing municipal utility would have to be able to conclusively prove in court that it is the sole provider within its service territory. Possibly in the 1960s and the 1970s, that was a no-brainer. But in that period of time since, we've had the rise of direct access contracts. We've had the development of third-party owned cogeneration projects. We've had the promotion of solar power purchase agreements. There is not a single municipal utility in this state that could prove conclusively in Superior Court, and there is no centralized database to rely upon. There's not a single utility that could prove in Superior Court that it meets that standard. And as a consequence, someone, and there are some 250,000 of us lawyers licensed in California, so one of us will be able to challenge any new connection, any new home purchaser, any new business connection, anything that involves a new utility account under the terms of this amendment would be subject to an election with a required approval of a two-thirds majority of the voters.
So when I quoted you earlier, it was in appropriate context.
Absolutely.
That any of the several dozen similarly impacted jurisdictions of municipal utility districts such as Anaheim, Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena, or Riverside, your new neighbor isn't going to be getting his electricity turned on until two-thirds of the voters say so. And you stand by that?
I certainly do. And let's say that argument is wrong. Somebody is going to have to go to court if this passes. Someone is going to have to go to court and have it overturned. And as a consequence, you have got an extraordinary chilling effect on the business climate and on the real estate market in those 48 communities.
That was my next question, because I asked that of the LAO, and they didn't want to venture down that path. But this could have serious impacts to the overall California economy without a doubt.
I don't think there's any question, and I believe that is why the realtors, California Association of Realtors, has opposed this ballot measure. There's no reason why anybody wants to say that, on the other hand. None of the municipal utilities have an interest in calling attention, or the attention of their bondholders, to that particular problem. None of the existing real estate agents have an interest in calling attention to that problem because of the potential chilling effect. But I think that were this the legislative committee process, it's the type of drafting problem that would have been worked out months and months in advance of a bill being considered for final consideration.
I appreciate your support in making that statement. Again, I think it's no small mistake that PG&E did not return to the legislature. They're welcome to a change of opinion, certainly, without a doubt. But that's what this body exists for. That's what this building exists for. It's what this institution exists for. And it's beyond disrespectful. Gentleman from Reading, I didn't get your name.
Paul Hooser.
Thank you for your testimony and your concern with the very aspects that we're talking about here, in that, as you were saying, you would not be able to promote your lower rates and your better delivery of service, which is your calling card.
Absolutely, that's the case. And if you can imagine over time, 10 or 20 years, as the city expands and annexes, and it's almost impossible to overcome this two-thirds hurdle, you have a core part of the city that has a traditional municipal electric service.
It's just a high bar. It's not a hurdle.
Right. High bar.
High bar.
But that expanded area, you eventually grow over time to where the taxpayers and the ratepayers are no longer the same group, and it becomes not only are there public safety issues when you have a fire and who's the electric provider when you want to get service disconnected to a building or a structure that may be on fire, but you also lose the political will to support the traditional utility when you need assets. You have, at some point, a larger constituency not served by the municipal utility than currently served. In this body, I'm sure, can just imagine the political ramifications as you go down that path.
Thank you, sir. And then lastly, Mr. Giesman, your second tapeworm, the mystery of where the $35 million comes from, you said it ought to be illegal. As an attorney, if you have any suggestions how we could make it so, I'm here to author the bill.
I'll give that some consideration.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Skinner.
Well, my question was going to sort of follow the point that you made about, I did find it kind of alarming that there were no restrictions, or it would appear that there are no restrictions to PG&E using ratepayer funds to, in effect, put on a ballot measure that would then restrict their own ratepayers. And I'm not fully versed in what the different regs or legislation is that might govern that, but are there some restrictions that this expenditure was able to not have to comply? Doesn't fall under, or?
Assemblymember, PG&E would tell you that those are the shareholders' funds. Those aren't ratepayer funds. Those are the shareholders' funds, because they keep that money in one pocket as opposed to the pocket that holds the ratepayer funds. But the Public Utilities Commission establishes rates and a rate of return calculated on PG&E's cost of capital in order to provide for the investment in needed infrastructure, not to create a slush fund for sole-sponsored political campaigns. So if these are the shareholder funds, it would seem that the Public Utilities Commission set PG&E's rate a bit too high. That's $35 million that's not going into the infrastructure improvements that might improve service to Mr. Leno's business. It's $35 million being set aside for a political campaign, which PG&E estimates is about 6 to 9 cents a share. Now, as you know, a number of the public employee unions, CalPERS, CalSTRS, end up owning PG&E stock as part of their indexed portfolios. I've been told that the teachers own about 2 million shares of PG&E stock. If, in fact, they are now a forced contributor to this ballot measure, I would think most of their members, and probably the trustees of CalSTRS, would prefer to see that money spent on dividend rather than campaign contributions to the ballot measure.
Maybe we need a 2/3 vote of the shareholders.
Other questions from committee? Seeing none, let's thank you very much to this panel. Proceed now to the public comment section of today's agenda. If you'd like to make a public comment, please form a line behind Mr. Tony there. Yes, stage left to your right. That's the microphone. And again, if we can ask you to keep your comments to as close to 2 minutes as possible. Try not to be too repetitive or redundant from prior speakers. If you have something in writing, we'd love to get it in writing, and we'll try to keep this moving along. To those gentlemen right in front of you.
Thank you, Chairman.
And please introduce yourself when you begin.
Yes. My name is Mark Toney. I'm the Executive Director of TURN, the Utility Reform Network. I'm here to explain why TURN opposes Proposition 16. We oppose the PG&E customer retention through captivity rather than offering stellar service at low prices. TURN has historically been neutral on public power campaigns. We believe in the local decision-making process. However, the local community has decided to do that. We believe that reducing competition diminishes PG&E's incentive to provide the best service at the lowest prices, and that Proposition 16 is bad for all PG&E customers, not only for those who want public power. In the handout, I've provided that PG&E is requesting a nearly 20% rate increase for 2011, even with the bad economy. There's a table 2.1 that shows that from their latest general rate case filing. PG&E rates are among the highest in the state and higher than most public utilities. There's a chart that, at least as of 2008, lists the kilowatt cents per hour charge. Then PG&E is spending up to $35 million collected from ratepayers to fund this initiative. 100% of the $14 billion in operating revenue for PG&E Corporation comes from the PG&E utility. I've included the financial data from the 2008 PG&E annual report. We basically believe that it's a abuse of the ballot initiative process for PG&E to be the sole funder of an initiative that's designed to benefit itself, and that this is a sign of PG&E moving from what we support of a model of a regulated utility into a model of wanting a regulated monopoly to moving towards a protected monopoly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes right on the dot.
Thank you. My name's Jeff Shields. I'm General Manager of South San Joaquin Irrigation District. I'm going to focus quickly on just two comments. First of all, South San Joaquin Irrigation District was formed by the voters, and my board of directors stands for election every 4 years. All 5 of my current directors have been contested by PG&E. Sometimes they've spent as much as $40,000 to unseat one local irrigation district board member. We are exposed to the electors, and PG&E has never won an election in our service territory. Interestingly, we've never attended a PG&E board meeting. We don't record their meetings. We don't have the opportunity to look behind the curtain at a lot of their costs, but they do tape record our meetings. They do pay for consulting firms to campaign against my board members. So my first comment is, for 100 years, we've enjoyed the sunshine of public scrutiny, and we think that it's only fair to expose that to PG&E. Now, let me tell you why I'm really here, and that's my second comment. And that has to do with, I think, something that the supervisors from San Francisco spoke to, and that is what's really at risk here. And let me start this comment out with the fact I'm a California veteran. That means something to me, our Constitution. I defended this Constitution in uniform. PG&E tells me that their shareholders are the ones that are funding this campaign. And if that's true, then it's important that we look at who those shareholders are. So let's start out. One of the largest shareholders of PG&E Corporation is Barclays Global UK Holdings. Barclays Global UK Holdings owns 14.4 million shares of PG&E, 3.9%. That means Barclays UK Holding is going to change my Constitution to the tune of $1,170,000 contribution to this campaign. KBC Group NV, whatever that is. I can tell you this, it's based in Brussels, and it's a banking institution of some kind. They're putting $12,000 into changing my Constitution.
Okay, thank you. I need to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay, less egregious, J.P. Morgan Chase, $25 billion taxpayer bailout. They're putting in $744,000. If these foreign banks...
Any additional comments you want to submit in writing, we're happy to take.
Okay,
Next
thank
speaker,
you. I
please.
will give you written comments. Thank you.
My name is Hisham Attel. I am the Deputy General Manager for Merced Irrigation District. The district services 7,400 customers in its area, and of all the agencies you're going to hear about today, Merced Irrigation District will be the most impacted by this proposition because MID does not have an exclusive area. Therefore, we compete with PG&E door to door. The district has about 120 megawatt worth of electricity between hydroelectric and stuff that we're looking at as far as wind and biogen. And the peak power for our area is about 90 megawatt. If this proposition passes through, what we have today, I wouldn't call risky, but if this proposition passes through, we have $100 million worth of assets that will be sunk and the ratepayers would have to deal with. Why is this proposition, what's the significance of an exclusive area versus non-exclusive area? If I have a barber shop that wants to open today, that wants to connect to Merced Irrigation District after the proposition in the city of Atwater, we have to get a two-thirds vote for 3 cities and 5 towns and within the area of the Merced Irrigation District, because we compete door to door. If we have and the proposition is ambiguous. If there's a business that happens to decide to go back to PG&E in our case, and we were able to be able to bring it back, going to PG&E would be a one-way ticket. Coming back, it would require a two-thirds vote, because the proposition doesn't say when are we expanding versus when we are not expanding our area. So what's going to happen in the long run is that the service area of the district could be shrinking, and that could put a bigger and bigger burden on our facilities.
Okay.
We have.
Let me ask you to wrap it up, please.
Well, my request to this body is, if this proposition passes, we would request that the body look at whatever authority it has to re-level the playing field. Otherwise, you're going to see a lot of damages happening to our type of municipalities.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. David Jones on behalf of 2 clients. Burbank Water and Power is opposed for obvious reasons, and the mayors and council members of Marin County are also opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Trowbridge, and I represent Merced Irrigation District and Modesto Irrigation District, both POUs. Public power has been a lawful, beneficial energy choice for decades. Like others today, the districts view Prop 16 as one company taking advantage of our political process to fund a measure, clothe it as a benevolent taxpayer protection device solely to consolidate its monopoly stronghold and eliminate competition and customer choice. Merced's entire electric service area and a portion of Modesto's service area overlaps with PG&E's service territory. This means the districts compete head-to-head with PG&E in these overlapping areas. Under Prop 16, each would need two-thirds voter approval before hooking up a single new customer. Prop 16 violates the clear intent of AB 2638, which was adopted in 2000 to memorialize an agreement between Merced, Modesto, and PG&E to conclusively resolve a history of competitive issues. We're also concerned that Prop 16 fails to disclose the multiple opportunities consumers already have by law to vote on or otherwise influence POU service proposals, falsely implying that consumers currently don't have a say. We emphasize that the governing bodies of POUs are elected by and locally accountable to their consumers, unlike PG&E's board of directors. We're concerned about vote dilution. If 1/3 plus 1 of the consumers votes no in a Prop 16 election, the proposed public power service will not happen, even if a majority of the voters favor the service. And we want a fair fight. PG&E has said its shareholders are willing to spend up to $35 million on Prop 16, even with a hit to profits. POUs are prohibited by law from spending public funds on campaign activity. POUs are severely constrained in terms of how they can address this initiative. We ask for your help to keep the spotlight on the likely adverse effects of Prop 16 so that California consumers get all the facts as they decide how to vote on this measure.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Kiara Ross on behalf of the League of California Cities, and we just wanted to note for the record that 2 weeks ago our Board of Directors nearly unanimously voted to oppose Proposition 16 for a number of the reasons that you heard from both Redding and San Francisco earlier today. We're very concerned about its ability to restrict our local control. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara George, I'm with Women's Energy Matters. We are one of the leading advocates for CCA in Marin County, and we are also ratepayer advocates at the California Public Utilities Commission. We specialize in the energy efficiency proceedings. We have extensively documented PG&E's use of energy efficiency funds to undermine our CCA in Marin County. I have a video that we produced that shows PG&E's chief counsel offering special deals to Novato for energy efficiency and solar programs if they will reject community choice. We know that this has taken place in other public power campaigns as well as the CCA work in San Francisco. And I just want to point out that the PG&E has violated campaign disclosure laws by using energy efficiency funds in this way. That's an additional problem. I have written up these issues for the CPUC. We have filed an application for rehearing of the recent decision, which gives PG&E $1.3 billion of energy efficiency funds that they may use at their discretion anywhere in their territory without having to disclose where they use it. We ask you, the legislature, to pressure the CPUC and take action yourself if necessary to suspend PG&E's use of energy efficiency funds, its control over this political slush fund, while this is taking place. Thank you so much. I have a package which gives you the application for rehearing, the description of the use of energy efficiency funds in Marin County. We also have the links to the video and our and the letters that PG&E has written to Novato and to the county of Marin. We
We'll have
ask you
the
to
sergeants
action.
take that and share it with the committee
The
members.
City of San Francisco and Marin County have also filed formal comments at the CPUC asking for them to take action to prohibit this kind of marketing.
Okay, ma'am, I need to ask you to finish up there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Patterson, member of the SMUD Board of Directors from 1999 to 2008. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the stunning arrogance of PG&E's most recent attempt to deny California ratepayers their constitutional right to choose their power providers. In 2002, the elected officials of Yolo County, all but one, came to SMUD. SMUD didn't try to take over Yolo County. The elected officials came to SMUD asking to be part of the SMUD service territory where the rates are 25% lower, the reliability is way better, and the customer service is way better. After 3 years of studies and public hearings, the SMUD board voted to move forward with the annexation. When 2 independent feasibility studies determined that the annexation would benefit both SMUD and YOLO customers, PG&E collected signatures to put an advisory vote on the ballot, asking current SMUD customers to weigh in on whether they wanted to vote on the matter. And at that point, a campaign of terror ensued, funded entirely by PG&E. Too costly, too risky was the theme of the campaign, and I show you PG&E's playbook, New Public Power Takeovers, Strategic Resources for Defeating Municipalization. Senior VP Nancy McFadden came to a board meeting and asked SMUD to fund a joint study with PG&E and delay the annexation until the new results were available. I asked Ms. McFadden if PG&E would change its position if the results turned out the same as the other 2 independent studies. McFadden stood in our boardroom and said, PG&E will do whatever it takes to keep the government from taking our property. So in addition to arrogance, they were disingenuous. PG&E spent $12 million to defeat the annexation in Yolo, and that didn't include the giveaways to schools, businesses, and chambers of commerce in Yolo County. Their campaign was successful in 2006, sadly, and Yolo continues to pay 25% more for their electricity than their neighbors across the river. When the Yolo residents asked to get better service, better rates, and greater reliability, the answer was not a chance. You'll continue to get the same inferior service you've had for decades. PG&E is tired of fighting little skirmishes and has decided to drop an atom bomb on the state's ratepayers to end their freedom of choice once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Loy. I work at the Division of Ratepayer Advocates at the Public Utilities Commission, but I'm here on my own dime. I in no way represent DRA or the Public Utilities Commission in my remarks here. PG&E's Proposition 16 is commercial fraud and anti-competitive behavior masquerading as private free speech. PG&E's election campaign for a 2/3 vote is a restraint of trade operating under the guise of a campaign to protect taxpayers from government. It constitutes commercial speech, not free speech, because it meets 3 criteria. PG&E's speech is directed at a commercial audience, that is, its customers. The speech, PG&E's speech contains commercial economic statements regarding commercial economic facts, that is, the costs and risks of municipalities and other entities purchasing PG&E's property and operating utilities. PG&E's corporate speech is likely to influence customers' decision-making for its commercial product, that is, who will provide electric service. To be fair, this goal of protecting taxpayers from government via elections should logically and reasonably be extended to include the choice of state regulation of PG&E service. And in addition, if you think that the demarcation between PG&E and other service providers is so clear, then you should read the briefs and the PUC's line extension allowances. There's a lot of competition for commercial and other real estate developments that's going to be adversely impacted by this proposition.
Thank you
I have
very
written
much.
comments too. Thank you.
2 minutes right on the dot.
Hello, my name is Dan Berman. In the course of writing a book called Who Owns the Sun with the late John O'Connor, a book that came out in the late 90s, we investigated what SMUD was doing, and we found out that democracy is good for the energy business. It's the only entity in the whole world that chose by a vote of the people to shut down a nuclear power plant. Secondly, we found out that SMUD was a pioneer in solar energy. They have 1.5 times as many, this is a couple of years ago, 1.5 times as much solar electric capacity, photovoltaic per capita as PG&E, twice as much wind. So some people, after reading this book and reading a review of it, said, let's take over the electric company. So we start meeting at a cafe, at the Roma Cafe in Davis. And there was a guy, his name is Jim, forget his last name. He started coming to all the meetings. He was always adverse to everything we were doing. He had an objection. We had heard a rumor he had been a PG&E employee and was retired. Well, when we tried to put the issue before the voters, Davis Municipal Utility District in 2000, he stood up and testified against it. A year later, using resources, FERC Form 2, page 357, we found out he'd passed go and collected over $90,000 in 1997 from PG&E as a consultant. The next year, 1998, he collected over $86,000. So we wrote it up in a local rag called the Flatlander, PG&E's Mole in Davis. But then we thought, well, let's go, if we want to bring the benefits of public power and democratic electricity to Davis, why not go with a proven organization, SMUD? We tried, we campaigned. PG&E, through a kind of trick of the ballot, forced us to have an election on whether to extend, we ended up having 2 elections in the year 2006 over whether we'd be able to take over, SMUD would be able to take over 70,000 meters.
Sir, you've had over 2 minutes now, and I appreciate the story, but I need you to make your point.
They spent $13 million on a local election. That's plutocracy in action, $100 per elector. Think of that when you think of democracy in action. That's not democracy. That's rule by the rich or plutocracy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan Match. I'm with Main Street Moms. We're a member group of the Broad Alliance in Marin County that has been working in a public participatory process myself for 3 years, but it's been a 7-year process. I think that's we've been to the city and town council meetings of 11 cities and towns and numerous board of supervisors meetings. It's the proper process for something this complex. I just wanted to say that to correct PG&E's representation that this effort is targeting CCAs because they are too risky for us clueless ratepayers. It was acknowledged in the decisive Board of Supervisors meeting by the supervisors that PG&E represented the only remaining significant risk for our CCA. And when PG&E described the stalled and or failed CCA in San Joaquin, if you read the last minutes of that CCA, PG&E's interference and delay was the risk that killed that CCA. So They have made a straight financial calculation that spending $13 million in Yolo County, $16 million on PR against San Francisco CCA, whatever they've been spending to show up in force at each of these tiny town council meetings in Marin, and to really bury us in now glossy mailers. They're phone banking people, offering them better rates. They're everywhere in Marin. They've made a calculation that they can stop spending that money spot by spot and can finish us off once and for all with the $35 million on Prop 16. So please do everything you can to stop this thing.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least,
Thank you, Chair Padilla and Fuentes. Thank you very much for holding this hearing. My name is Mariko Yamada. I currently represent the 8th Assembly District, which includes Yolo County. And I wasn't planning to speak originally, but having watched the hearing this afternoon and hearing some of the comments, I felt compelled to just add this bit of information. I was on the Yolo County Board of Supervisors during the SMUD annexation period, when we, Yolo County officials, all 4 cities and the majority of the Board of Supervisors all voted to support an effort to annex into a proven public utility, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. I can tell you that after 3 years of studies and agreement on all sides that this would be a good thing for both Sacramento and Yolo counties, we did engage in an effort to bring that annexation to fruition. Everything that you've heard from the previous speakers about the tactics used, the amount of campaign funds, and other opportunities for PG&E to use their superior financial power to prevent us from the annexation did not really hold true in Yolo County. We came within, I would say, 10 votes. There were 2 measures at that time in 2006. We came within 10 votes on one of the measures, and we did win in Yolo County on the first measure. So had it not been for some other changes in direction in Sacramento County, we might be in SMUD today. I ardently believe that. I think PG&E has taken notice of the fact that it doesn't take all the money in the world to reach the voters, to persuade people that public power is superior in many respects to the IOU, investor-owned utility provision of service. And Susan Patterson, the former SMUD director, said it very well, as did just the immediate previous speaker to me, that instead of having to deal with us, the people, on a case-by-case basis, to now propose a constitutional amendment to raise the threshold to a 2/3 vote to engage, have communities engage in making decisions on public power, I think is discouraging, at worst, but disingenuous at best. And I very much applaud the fact that you're holding this hearing today. I also served as the Yolo County co-chair for the SMUD annexation campaign, and I will be actively on non-state time working to defeat Prop 16 with all the power that we have behind us. And I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. There's no further speakers. I want to thank you all for attending today, for your patience. It's been almost 2.5 hours. I hope you found this beneficial and informative. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.